In this video, I'm going to be explaining a new fantasy football format called Best Ball. So for me, I have always played fantasy football, just your standard way. Recently, I've been getting more and more into DFS, where you're playing daily fantasy sports. I play on FanDuel in a weekly format. I play against friends. I play against random people, and that takes up most of my time these days. I don't really have the time to play in 9 or 10 leagues like I did 9 or 10 standard leagues like I did before I had my child. So for the last 3 or 4 years, I really haven't been playing much in the way of standard fantasy football. I try to stick to your weekly fantasy, where you're more worried about matchups and injuries than you're having to keep track of 10 different home leagues or internet leagues or whatever the case may be. So for me, I've kind of moved away from the standard fantasy format in favor of weekly fantasy formats. Specifically, I play on FanDuel. But this year, I have found a very new and exciting way to play fantasy football, and it is called Best Ball. You can play Best Ball on Yahoo Sports, although it depends where you live. I live in Florida, and we are not allowed to play Best Ball here in Florida. Apparently, it's considered gambling. I thought gambling was legal now. Apparently, it's not. So we cannot play Best Ball on Yahoo Sports here in Florida. I do, however, play on Draft.com. So Draft.com, I go over there. I play Best Ball fantasy football. I don't use any of their other games. They have all kinds of different sports, all kinds of different fantasy options. I only play Best Ball football, so I can't vouch for any other system. But I do really, really enjoy Draft.com's fantasy football best ball program. So let me just answer the question right off the bat. What is best ball fantasy football? Well, it's essentially you are only drafting your team, and you don't have to do any of the other stuff. There are no waiver wires, there's no trades, there's no setting your roster. Essentially, it's just fantasy football with the best part of fantasy football, drafting your team. Okay, so here's how it actually works. You go in, you pick a team. You can play, your traditional 12-person teams or your 10-person teams. You can even play like a all-star league where you're only playing against, 5 or 6 other people, and then you're getting, just the best players at every position. So it's like an all-star fantasy matchup. But traditionally, the most popular games are your 12-team formats. Okay, and you go in and you do a standard snake draft. It goes for 18 rounds, and that's it. After that, you don't have to do anything else. Come back at the end of the year if you want and see if you won or not. Okay, well, how do we do this, right? Well, what they do is what we call best ball. So let's say, for example, you drafted 3 quarterbacks. Let's say you drafted, why not? Let's go with Roethlisberger, Trubisky, and Phillip Rivers. Okay, let's say Rivers puts up his average 20 points. Trubisky gets injured and throws 2 interceptions and only puts up, 3 points. And then Roethlisberger has an awesome game and he puts up 35. Well, the way it works is your starter for that week is going to be the quarterback, who scored the highest number of points. And in this case, it's Ben Roethlisberger's 35. So Trubisky's 5 points don't count. Rivers' 20 points don't count. You only get Ben Roethlisberger's 35 points. So that's why we call it best ball. You take whichever player did the best at that position. So in this case, you would get Ben Roethlisberger's 35 points. It's just like in golf, where if you're playing with a foursome and you're playing best ball, everybody hits the ball off the tee. Whichever shot is the best, everyone takes their second shot from that spot. Okay, it makes a lot of sense. That's why it's called best ball in golf, and that's why this fantasy format is called best ball as well. You take your best player and you keep their score. The same works at running backs. So let me just go through the rosters. You need to start 1 quarterback, 2 running backs, 3 tight ends, and 1. I'm sorry, let me do that again. You need to start 1 quarterback, 2 running backs, 3 wide receivers, and 1 tight end. And then you have your flex position. So that's off your bench. Whichever player did best off your bench that is not a quarterback is your flex. So it's not a super flex where you can start quarterbacks. It has to either be a running back, wide receiver, or tight end. And all of these leagues are half point per reception leagues. So there's no full point. It's just like what FanDuel does. Okay, so I've talked about that. I talked about who the starters are. So let's talk about the different positions. So what I like to do is have a strategy that I essentially call high floor, no ceiling. So I want one guy at every position who's going to, kind of guarantee me a low floor. So at quarterback, this is like super easy to talk about. Phillip Rivers is my guy, okay? Phillip Rivers last season, he never scored over 30 fantasy points, which is not good. I admit that. You want your quarterbacks to put up, a couple huge games every year. Well, Phillip Rivers never did that. He also never had a bad game. So in his first 15 weeks, he scored 15 or more points every single week. I believe he was the only quarterback to do that in the NFL. And then in week 16, when they weren't really trying anymore, yes, he scored under 15 points. But for the first 15 weeks, he had very mediocre production or better every single week. Well, we want one guy like that at every single position. This way, it raises our floor. Okay, so in our case, if Roethlisberger stinks and Trubisky stinks, we still get Phillip Rivers 15 to 24, 25 points. Okay, that raises the floor of where we want to be on our team for that position. Now, with those other two spots, I want to grab guys who have huge upsides, who, maybe they're injured one week, or maybe they're suspended, or maybe they get benched. Guys like, let's see, what would his name be? Oh, Jameis Winston? Yeah, he comes to mind. So Winston, he's never guaranteed to play. He's never guaranteed to play well. But I think he played 9 games last year. In the 9 games he was out there, he actually ranked as the 6th best fantasy quarterback. So the thing about best ball is we don't really care about your bad performances. What we want to know is how many good performances did you have? And Winston had 4 games last year where he scored 29 points or more. That is really, really good, especially in only 9 games. Now he has no one looking over his back. He should get more opportunity to play. But even if he doesn't, we're going to start Jameis in 4 games next year, and he's being drafted outside the top 100. So you've got Phillip Rivers to kind of fill in the games, and then you've got the awesome Jameis Winston games. And then if you combine it with one more guy like... I don't really trust Josh Allen. I think there's going to be a lot of weeks where he doesn't do much, but I also think there's going to be an occasional 3, 4, 5 weeks where he rushes for 2 touchdowns and throws 2 touchdowns and he puts up close to 30 points. And then you're going to be able to use his amazing game. But you don't have to start all the really bad games that he's going to have next season as well. So that's the thing about best ball is you don't have to start a guy when they're doing awful because you have other guys to fill in for you. Okay, so it's the same thing at running back, except for the running back, you have to start 2 guys. So one guy I like as my floor at running back is out of New England, James White. So White catches all kinds of balls. He doesn't run the ball that often, but he's going to see a ton of targets. So that's going to keep his floor pretty high up there. He should be scoring at least 10 points a game for you in a fantasy perspective. Now, he might not ever have those 30-point games that a guy like, Aaron Jones out of Green Bay might have. Aaron Jones is a great example. He doesn't play all that much, and they didn't give him a lot of work last year, but when he does play, he can put up huge numbers. So that's a guy I want to own, but he isn't my safe guy. Wide receiver is a little bit easier to do this, right? Any kind of slot receiver is going to be pretty safe. Guys like Adam Humphries, even Larry Fitzgerald, they're going to see a lot of targets, right? So they are pretty safe, and they can raise the floor for your team. Now, I don't want a whole team of those guys because then you're just going to end up scoring 15, 10 points a game. You don't want that. You want guys like Mike Evans who can go out there and score you 25, 30 points on a good day, but on a bad day might put up 5, right? Those are the kind of players you want to fill out the rest of the roster. You only want one safe guy, okay? Everybody else should be all about the upside. And then at tight end, it gets really, really messy, and we'll talk about tight end later when we do roster construction. But those are the big things you need to know about best ball. And the best thing is you draft your team, which is like the most fun part of fantasy football, and then you can forget about it until the end of the year. But you also have guys to follow every single week too. So it's not like you don't have a rooting interest in your team. You do get to follow those players all year long. Okay, so now roster construction. Typically, the baseline for what you want to have is after you want to have 2 quarterbacks. These are minimum numbers, right? 2 quarterbacks, 6 running backs, 6 wide receivers, and 2 tight ends. Okay, that's a total of 16 players. Now you have 2 extra spots to use wherever you like. Now you don't have to do this strategy, but it is kind of standard practice that you want to have at least 2 quarterbacks, 2 tight ends, 6 running backs, 6 wide receivers. Typically, I will go with 6 running backs, and then I'll throw that extra pick to my wide receiver since we have to start 3 wide receivers. I think it's a good idea to have 7 wide receivers. And then I've got one more roster spot. So typically I'll either use that on a quarterback and have 3 quarterbacks or on a running back. Okay, so let's talk about running backs real quick. We mentioned we want to draft Phillip Rivers. Well, Phillip Rivers is going as like the 140th player overall. So it's really easy to pick up Phillip Rivers late in a draft. And actually, I'm only drafting quarterbacks in either the 6th round, the 8th round, or 10th round or later. So if Mahomes falls to me in the 6th round, great, I'm going to get an early quarterback. If somebody like Andrew Luck or Watson or Rodgers falls to me in the 8th round, I might draft them. And then I'm not really drafting guys until the 10th round like Cam Newton, because listen to all these guys who are going outside of the top 100. Cam Newton, Drew Brees, Russell Winston. We talked about Jameis Winston. We got Goff, Prescott, Roethlisberger, Lamar Jackson. Lamar Jackson is actually another guy. He's got a little bit of injury risk, but he could be a high floor guy for you because he's always going to have those rushing yards. Josh Allen, same kind of deal. Trubisky is your high upside player. You've got Rivers, your high floor. Kirk Cousins, Jimmy Garoppolo, Tom Brady. I mean, that is a ton of guys. That's why you can wait on quarterback. If you don't have a quarterback in your first 10 picks, don't worry about it. There's plenty of guys out there. Now, after that top 10 is gone, and you filled up your running backs, you filled up your wide receivers, you might want to start thinking about quarterback at that point because you don't want three guys like Cousins, Garoppolo, and Brady. That's kind of like a nightmare. All right, I want at least some upside on my team. Okay, so that's the quarterback position. Tight end is also kind of ugly. So really, there's one guy you can draft early, and that's Kelsey. Kelsey's awesome out of Kansas City. He finished, I think, with the 7th most targets of any player in football last year, which is crazy for a tight end. I mean, the guy is a beast. He's going around pick 8 in most drafts. I have him rated at, 5, 6, 7, 8. Yeah, I have him rated at 8 in my board. So then you can pick up Kittle and Ertz, kind of the turn around pick 25. But then if you don't pick up one of those top 3 tight ends, you're really not drafting a tight end until kind of the 6th round, 7th, 8th, 9th round. And there's kind of a group of 5 guys that I like. Okay, I like Cook, Howard, Henry, Ingram, and McDonald. Okay, so that's 8 tight ends. If you get one of those 8 tight ends, I would say just pick up one more tight end that you like outside of that group. All right. Maybe you pick up in the 120s, you can get Andrews, Burton, Rudolph. Just pair him with one of those guys, and you're fine just going with 2 tight ends. All right. Now, if you don't get one of those top 8 guys, I'd be taking 3 tight ends because I'd be nervous. Okay. I want one of those top 8 guys. I don't want to deal with Burton and Ebron and Hawkinson and Fant. I like Fant and Ebron as like my super high upside tight end next to my other good tight end, but I don't want them to be my good tight end. Okay, does that make sense? So if you don't get a top 8 tight end, I'm going to draft 3 of them. So that's where that extra roster spot's going to go. And then with quarterback, if I don't get one of the really good quarterbacks, I'm probably going to draft 3 quarterbacks as well. I like having 3 quarterbacks. It gives me the opportunity to avoid injury risk, right? If one quarterback goes down, I still have 2 others. And then it gives me a chance to pick from 3 guys' scores instead of 2. And injury is a huge deal, especially at quarterback, because you have bye weeks to remember. Okay, so at least 1 week out of the year, your quarterback's going to be out. Okay, so you need to watch where the bye weeks line up. All right, so for example, you cannot draft Roethlisberger and Winston together. I almost made that mistake 2 days ago. They both have week 7 buys. So in week 7, you're going to be completely out of luck, right? You can't have 2 quarterbacks on the same bye week. It just doesn't make sense, right? One of them has to back up the other guy because you can't afford to have an empty quarterback spot during a week in this format, right? You might think, oh, over the course of 16 weeks, who cares about, 20, 25 points? I could have got a quarterback. That could be the difference between you landing in the money and landing out of the money, right? It makes all the difference in the world. And speaking of money, yes, these are for money. I'm not even sure they offer a free option, but the lowest is $1. You can play for up to like $1,000. They have $1 million tournament going on right now that you can put in for $25 and have a chance to win $1 million. They have a smaller version of the tournament for $5. So they have all kinds of different cash prizes you can go through. But anyway, so what were we talking about? Oh, the different positions. So it just depends where you want to put your roster spot at. Now, if let's say Aaron Rodgers falls to me in the 8th round. Okay, cool. I might take Rodgers and just one more quarterback. I might take Rodgers and Rivers and call it a day with those 2 guys. I mean, Rivers hasn't missed a game in like 9 years. It's pretty crazy. So it just depends how your roster lines up. Now, if you feel perfectly safe at tight end, you have a guy you like and a safety, and a quarterback, a guy you like and a safety, you can take 7 running backs and 7 wide receivers. You can spend those extra 2 roster spots however you like, okay? But I usually like to have 7 wide receivers because it just makes me nervous starting 3 of them every week. Okay, what else do we have here? Bye weeks. So yeah, so bye weeks are super important. Before we get into that though, let's talk about the different formats you can play. So you can either play slow best ball or fast best ball. Fast best ball, you only get 30 seconds between every pick. So that means when your pick comes up, you got 30 seconds. And you have to check your bye week, okay? I didn't make the mistake, but this morning, so my first pick, I had, who did I pick? I picked Kamara as my first pick. In my second round, I got Juju. And then on the way back, on the 3rd round, my 2 top-rated players, okay, were Antonio Brown and Mike Evans. Okay, they're right next to each other. I think they're about the same. I don't really care. I like them both. Right, but they both. Mike Evans has the same bye week as Juju, so I don't want my top 2 wide receivers both to share the same bye week because I want them to kind of carry me. I want them to have the same bye week as some junkie player at the end of my roster if I have to have the same bye week. Right, you can't have your top 2 players have the same bye week. Really, you can't have your top, 3 or 4 players at the running back or wide receiver position have the same bye week. Maybe the top 3. Let's call that a rule. In your top 3, you cannot pick players with the same bye week. Okay, so I was super nervous because after that, I'm like, well, what am I going to do if the guy before me, right, takes Antonio Brown? I'm screwed because I can't take Mike Evans. So then you have to come up with a backup plan. All right, and luckily this was a slow league, right, where you get 8 hours between your picks. All right, now nobody usually takes that long unless it's nighttime, right? Everybody's picking pretty quickly, but you have time to figure it out. It's called the slow draft. There's 8 hours between each pick. These drafts take weeks to complete, whereas the fast draft gets done when under an hour. Okay, but what ended up happening is he ended up taking Mike Evans. So I got Antonio Brown, so everything was fine. But if he had taken Antonio Brown, I had time to think about my next option, which was going to be Ertz. I'm like, all right, I'll take a tight end at pick. I think it was 27 at that point. No problem. He's outside. It's pretty decent value. But you have to have plan on top of plan on top of plan. So if you're playing the fast version of Best Ball, you've got to have your rankings and tiers, and you've got to be ready to go in order for you to make a good decision at that 30-second mark, because you have to check that bye week because you're not going to have all the byes memorized, right? You have to check bye weeks and make sure you're not overdoing it each time, all right? So there's a lot to pay attention to. I've gotten a lot better. I've played about 10 of these now, and I've gotten a lot better as we've practiced. But before you put in some big money into a fastball league, I would play the dollar ones over and over again until you kind of get comfortable with that 30-second shot clock, because it can be quite difficult. So yeah, check your bye weeks. Again, I'd recommend your top 3 running backs, your top 3 tight end or wide receivers. None of them should share a bye week, and then you shouldn't have any more than 3 guys on the same bye week at a position. So you can't have 3 running backs with week 7 bye weeks. That would be a disaster. That's half your roster off that one week. Okay, you want to put up numbers every single week. At your quarterback and your tight end, they shouldn't share bye weeks at all. Like, for example, I would never draft Roethlisberger and Winston in the same draft because they had the same bye week. So I think that's week 7. Yeah, week 7, I would be totally screwed and not pick up points, and we don't want that. So I believe that is about it for Best Ball Fantasy Football. That's pretty much how it works. Again, I'm not getting paid by draft.com. I don't have a referral code for you. None of that stuff. It's just they're where I play right now. I think it's fun. They've got a nice little platform. It's easy to use. Again, I can't vouch for Yahoo, but I know they have it. And those are the 2 big sites that I've seen come up. So that's it for Best Ball Fantasy Football. So before we go, I drafted a 10-person team last night in preparation for this today. So I just want to go through and let you know how my team stacked up. So at pick number 1, I think I had pick number 6, I went with Hopkins. Round 2, Juju. Round 3, I had Aaron Jones out of Green Bay. Round 4, Jacobs, the rookie out of Oakland. Round 5, I went with White. He's my safety running back out of New England. Round 6, I went with Ridley. Notice that it's only been running backs and wide receivers so far. Round 7, we're back to running back. I went with Penny. Round 8, I finally did something different here. I took a tight end. I took Cook out of New Orleans. Round 9, we are back to our running back. We took Jones out of Tampa Bay. And round 10, we have Chris Davis out of Tennessee. Round 11, Westbrook. So I still haven't taken a running back through 11 rounds. Now's where I started picking up quarterbacks. Round number 12, I picked up Roethlisberger. Round number 13, I went with another running back, a guy I really like, Hill out of Baltimore. He's kind of the backup for Ingram, and I think he'll be the 3rd down back, so I think he has value there. Next up, in round 14, I took some wide receivers. I took Paris Campbell here. I had my finger on Jimmy Garoppolo, and he actually went 2 picks later, but I thought Campbell was worth the upside as he could become that number 2 next to T.Y. Hilton in Indianapolis for Andrew Luck. Anyway, number 15, I went with Trubisky. There's another quarterback coming off the board. I thought he had upside because I got a little spooked, to be honest with you, after Garoppolo went. So I went with Trubisky there, and then I got my guy, my safety quarterback, who I always like to pick. I've got way too much of Phillip Rivers. Let me tell you, I end up drafting him like every draft. Rivers I went with in the 16th round. So quarterbacks I took in the 12th, 15th, and 16th round. Very low cost, and I got Roethlisberger, who finished 2nd in all of fantasy last year, Trubisky, who has good upside, and Rivers, who's safe. I love it. I love this strategy of waiting on quarterbacks. Number 17, I took Noah Fant as kind of my high upside tight end. I know he's a rookie, but he's playing with Joe Flacco. The Denver offense uses the tight end. I think he's a good fit there. And the thing is, I don't think he's going to be consistent because he's a rookie, right? But he should have a lot of games where he puts up huge numbers. So I like that. And in my last pick, I went with another wide receiver. I didn't feel like I needed 3 tight ends. I already had 6 running backs, so I went with 7th wide receiver. Moore, he should be the number 2 receiver in Seattle. Hopefully ahead of DK Metcalf this year. Hopefully I'm not making that pick wrong, because I'm making that pick a lot also at the end of my drafts. So I ended up in this draft with 3 quarterbacks, 6 running backs, 7 wide receivers, and 2 tight ends. That's, probably I would think that's the most popular format of roster construction there is. Okay, and that's all we have for fantasy football best ball format. I hope you learned something new today. Try it out; it's really fun. Even if you only spend $1 or $2, or you can do a free version at Yahoo if they let you. Okay, that's it for today. See you next time.